Well, it's 9:30. Go ahead, Brian. Brian, we cannot hear you. Well, we can sort of hear a squawky noise.
I'll just type it out.
We kind of heard you. In order for them to talk, they have to join the queue, and I have to unmute. Brian joined the queue, and I unmuted him, but then all we heard was the squawky noise, so something's funny. It might be a meet echo problem. That's going to be annoying. Dave, I'm still waiting for those slides, so I know. Magic of the Ethernet, of the internet, takes a little bit. Of course, if I do get them, I have to figure out how to present them. I may have to steal the connection here. And they may not. Oh, okay. I can do that. I don't know, Dave. Are you sure they went out? I got some other mail, but not yours. Okay. That should do it. Well, let me check my junk. You never know. Nope. You're not junked. All right. I'm a little concerned that the meet echo is not working. Can folks hear us at all? We're having trouble connecting to Jabber as well. If anybody can hear us on meet echo, can you just join the queue and I can see that shift here? All right, we have Brian and Spencer joining the queue, so at least some people can hear. Brian, can we hear you any better?
Yes, I can hear you.
Ah, we can hear you kind of too. All right, let me shift to Spencer Dawkins. Spencer.
So, yeah, so this looks like me.
That looks and sounds like you.
Fabulous. Thank you all for having me.
All right. Well, I'm going to assume that we're up and running as best we can, and I call the meeting to order. So the blue sheets are out there. Okay, everybody's signing the blue sheets. Thank you very much. We have a, somewhere here, our meeting materials. Thank you, Spencer Shepler. That's the regular agenda. I also have the other agenda here that is hopefully not queued up on this. I'm sorry, Dave? No, well, there is an agenda with a slide and the standard IETF. If we go down here to agenda slowly. And NFSV4 meeting materials. We actually have slowly. Gosh, isn't this helpful? The Note Well page. So this is just the Note Well reminder. IETF policies are in effect. Everything you say is a contribution. Thank you very much. All right, agenda. No, you can't deduct it on taxes, nor your Canadian taxes, I'm sure. So here's the agenda prepared prior to the meeting. We should bash it briefly. Chuck Lever has 2 items to present. Integrity management, architecture, and RPC RDMA crediting. Those slides are online. Tom Haynes has the open delegation versus delegation state IDs. That presentation is online. An additional 10 minutes for delegation. They're all in one deck. So the Dell STID thing, as well as offline files, like it sounds like. Dave Novak's slides were sent, but have not been uploaded. I will try to do that offline. Dave, I do have your slides now. The magic of the internet has delivered them finally. So we'll try to get those on the webpage before the presentation begins. And the time, 15 and 20 for Chuck, 20, 10, and 10 for Tom, 20 and 20 for Dave. Anything to bash? I'm good? Okay. Chuck, do you want me to present and you can simply speak? There's a taped off little thing that the camera will capture you. You have a red tape, but I'm not sure the policy for that. You don't have to stand in the camera, I suppose.
I think the red line here just means that the people are taking photographs out and about and having work on the
Well, that's going to photograph you, so.
That's fine.
Okay.
I hereby waive there is a remote.
There is a remote, and you may have it. The only problem is I can't figure out how to escape this bloody thing to get back to. These are IETF provided laptops. So.
So while we're waiting for those slides to be sort of production, the slide deck, I was asked to look into support for some binary. That's a pretty narrow thing to show you into this slide deck. The mechanism by which we think we're doing this is to adopt the Linux integrity regime critical mechanism that they can work in
Here it comes. Somewhere here, I'm sure there's a way to get it to do full screen. Here we are. How about that little guy?
So towards all of that end, I wrote a couple of drafts. The first one described how to do this using security labels. It's a gross hack. Nobody really liked. We all thought it might be interesting to allow some experimenting. But then Tom was good enough, Tom Haynes was good enough before that draft to give Quigley, his original author of the security labels draft. Well, you really can't do this because you want to poke more than one of these IMA hashes in your file as a security layer. You only have one security file. So I abandoned that approach and wrote this new draft IETF102-NFSV4-20180716-0930. That was posted a couple of months ago, I believe. And I just, before we go on, I just wanted to sort of mention how this all fits into the charter for this working group, in case you were wondering. The whole point of this, as we see, is to guide into the
Oh dear.
oh dear.
Thank you.
I hope you can hear me now. The whole point of this will be revealed in just a moment as I describe the use case, but what we want to do is basically add a feature that would be very useful in cases in cloud workloads, large-scale virtualization environments is what I've been calling it. And also, this is appropriate, it fits into our, address new security challenges. And I think you'll see that as I go on. But I just wanted to mention that up front. I think this fits well into our working group chart. So what is this thing? What is this thing all about? This is integrity measurement architecture. This is something that IBM cooked up a few years back. They've been implementing it in Linux on local file systems. And more recently, they've sort of been thinking about what it might take to put it into a remote file system. I think they were looking at SMB first, not really thinking of NFS, but then I sort of came along and said, I've been asked to look at making NFS support IMA, and they're like, oh, this is interesting to us. And so the Linux IMA community has sort of perked up their ears, and they're interested in this as well, or interested in seeing what happens. But basically, IMA is a form of integrity checking. It's end-to-end in the sense that it would be done entirely on NFS clients. It's done not by applications, but just under applications in the VFS of the operating system. But other than that, it is end-to-end. It's done when the file is created by the virtual file system on the client, and then it's checked by the virtual file system on the client when the file is read back from the server.
It's a per file?
It's per file.
Per file.
Right. It's kind of would not work if it was per file system. That would
Well,
be
per block was the other thing I was wondering.
right. My original end-to-end integrity proposal of a few years ago was block-oriented, and that is obviously not a very good fit for a file paradigm. So what we're basically doing is taking a hash of the file contents, and it's stored in a way that's it's basically hooked to the file. The hashes are HMAC hashes, and in order to protect them, they can be signed cryptographically. And I'll talk a little bit about how the hash signing material is protected. So this is sort of a rough idea of what the use case is. What we want to do, our primary use case right now is protecting executables, binaries, basically. On mobile devices, which don't have anything to do with NFS, but this is just an example, you basically want to detect intrusion or even replacement of applications. For example, if someone were to root your phone, you basically want to know whether the executables have been replaced or not. In cloud environments, the cloud tenants also want to be able to have a good idea that the executables that are being provided to them by the cloud provider is actually coming from a Linux distributor and has not been replaced by some malicious or even a well-intended third party. And it turns out, my employer is working on becoming a cloud provider, and they're interested in using NFS to provide software distribution for guests, for tenants' guests. And so this is why we're kind of interested in making sure that those executables that are provided over NFS can be checked for integrity by the tenants themselves. So as I mentioned, what we're basically doing is computing a hash over the contents of a file and then storing the HMAC. This would be done by the software distributor or basically a Linux distributor like Red Hat. As they are building a distribution, they would sign each of these executables. And then whenever the executable is used on a NFS client, for example, the HMAC would be, the signature would be checked, and the HMAC would be used to verify the file content. And I think it's important to note that we're not using, the verification doesn't use open. It's basically for executables, and executables, when they're run, they're not, you don't do an open on them. They're run via exec. So that's why the VFS, that's why this is all done in the VFS. It's not exposed to applications in any way. IMA also more recently has allowed the verification of some file attributes. We'll get to those in a minute, but there's some complications there, but we can verify. So just the TLDR is we can verify the file contents and a few of the file attributes as well. So this slide, slide 6, describes exactly what's in my proposal in the document that I opened the presentation with. Right now, we're only talking about immutable files. In other words, it would be executables that aren't changed very frequently. Basically, when you change an immutable file, what happens is the file is destroyed, and then the distributor creates a new file with a new HMAC. So the document also describes the protocol that the client uses to retrieve the HMAC hashes, and also the protocol that a client, an administrative client, for example, would use to set the HMACs. And as I mentioned, there's a small set of file attributes that can be verified. That set is variable. So in other words, there are certain attributes that are always going to be verified, and there are some that are optional. They may or may not be verified. And the set of which file attributes are verified is set for all the files on one file system, and the clients have to know which ones are verified in order to verify the attribute HMAC. There's only one attribute HMAC. Even in the local file system case, we recognize that performance of this kind of verification is going to be a concern. When you throw in a round trip with a server, it's going to be even worse. So we're going to have to think hard about ways of optimizing the verification of HMACs on large files, especially. Basically, we want to have, for example, mechanisms that will allow us to verify a part of the file. There are pretty well-known ways of doing that, and we can get into that later. It turns out that some of the attributes that they're talking about verifying on local file systems are extended attributes that aren't exposed via NFS, like SMAC security attributes, for example. So that's going to be a problem. We're going to have to deal with that somehow. Probably today it's going to be, we don't support that. If the file system supports SMAC attributes and they're actually part of the set of verified attributes, then those files can't be accessed. That's kind of how it's going to have to work for now. I also note that there are certain security sensitive attributes like NFSV4 ACLs that are not currently in the set of attributes that are verified by IMA. We'll have to talk to the IMA community about what to do about those. Then the problem with bringing this into the standards world, this IMA and NFS, is that there aren't any published standards that define what IMA is. There's a lot of material, there's code, there's a wiki, everybody has a wiki, but there's no published standard. It's not like a POSIX standard, even an existing one or a withdrawn one. There just isn't one. So we're gonna have to deal with that somehow. Probably we'll have to make this informational, or I'm not sure what we'll have to do with the NFS draft that I'm working on, but somehow we're going to have to deal with that. Eventually, we want to support the ability for clients to actually change certain files. In other words, they want to modify the content of the file and recompute the HMAC. There's been recent talk about what we want to do about protecting file names. I'm not sure what the use case is there. But they're talking about storing an HMAC that verifies the content of directory. And then, as I mentioned, there are a number of extended attributes that aren't supported in NFS that we will probably want to support sometime in the future. Now, as part of that, Linux has this thing called file capabilities. Lots of operating systems have something like this. But basically, what we do is we chop up the super user privilege into smaller pieces like this, and they're assigned to an application just like you set a set user I bit on a root owned executable, and that gives basically all of root's capabilities to that whenever that executable runs. We basically chop that up, and so cap chown means that the executable can change the ownership of files, but it can't do anything else. So this, what file capabilities are, is the Linux form of doing this. Solaris also has something that's very similar, but not the same. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because the set of file capabilities is one of the verified attributes that IMA supports. NFS does not support this right now. And so this is one of the things we'd like to have support for in NFS, so that we can support with, so we can protect it with IMA. So these slides, basically, last few slides, I can walk through them in detail, or can just sort of browse through them on your own. But basically, this is the idea that I want to bring file capabilities also to NFS. So what I would do is I'd probably write another document. Originally, I had folded both file capabilities and IMA into one, but they have similar but really separate issues. And so I decided that it would be better if we got through the simpler one first, which is IMA, and then we can look at doing capabilities. So it would, the form of that proposal would be very similar. It would be a draft that would describe an extension to NFSV4.2, and it would cover some of these, some of the bullet points on this slide. So this one does have file capabilities, is based on a POSIX draft, but is withdrawn. And of course, the Linux implementation of file capabilities is heavily modified from that draft. It doesn't look like Solaris file capabilities. It's very similar, but the semantics of the capabilities, individual capabilities, is different than what Solaris offers. So we need to have some way of defining how interoperation between a Linux client that supports file capabilities and a Solaris client or some other client that supports file capabilities, how that would work. It turns out there's also the ability to associate a set of file capabilities with a particular user namespace. A user namespace basically means in Linux a container. I'm not sure how that's going to work, but that, can you use the microphone? Thank you.
Is there any mapping to between user namespace and NFS?
There isn't really. That's one of the issues that we have to deal with. That's a complicated one, and that's one of the reasons why I split this one out to a separate proposal. And it's not even clear to me that we can say that user 77 on client A is the same as user 77 on client B. So I'm just not sure how that's going to work. The user namespaces don't look, they're they don't look like the user at domain ID mapping strings that we've got. I mean, so I'm hand waving a lot because I just don't understand how this is going to work, and some thinking, right? Thinking is going to have to go into this.
That's fine.
So that's this complete slide deck. Any questions? Anybody think this whole idea is crazy and I should stop right now and put my pencil down? Looks like somebody has something.
Yeah, one sec, Spencer. We have a question on the floor.
Yeah, I just suggest that you settle the capability thing as fast as possible because you don't want rich caps, right? So you don't want to have Windows capabilities, you don't want to have Unix capabilities, and have to have a document that describes how to merge them, like we had with Apples. I say you want to address it head on. That's all.
I do want to address it head on. I'm just not sure about timing. I mean, I think we can get IMA done without tying it to capabilities, but I would like to see both done. So yeah.
Spencer, one sec, Dave. Dave, one sec. Spencer Dawkins has a question.
Well, okay, go ahead.
Dave, one sec. Thank you.
Okay, so I was just going to say a couple of things. You were talking about, is this informational and things like that. The thing I would say is I would encourage you all to do the right thing and make the chairs and the area director figure out what to do with it.
Okay.
But doing the right thing is never something I'm going to speak against. It seems, if I'm understanding this correctly, it's like you have IMA attributes that aren't exposed by NFSV4 and vice versa. This seems like this could be a really interesting conversation to have if that was kind of lacing those things more tightly together. Am I understanding that right, or is that wrong?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
You had the previous slide where you were talking about previous. Yeah, I'll keep going back. Sorry. Yeah, this one here, where it's like, here's some Linux attributes that aren't exposed that are interesting to IMA. Here's some NFS things that aren't verified. It seems like that this is, if doing IMA is a good thing, it seems like this might be a good thing, a good opportunity to tie some things together. If this is useful over here, but it's not exposed over there. Do you see what I'm saying?
I'm trying to imagine who in the IMA community we can engage with this.
Excellent. So that was my third thing, and then I will mute again. So no published standard defining IMA. So there's an IMA community that is broader than IBM now. Is that right?
Right. It's an upstream Linux community. Yes.
Okay. Any chance that they might want a published standard defining IMA?
I can certainly address the question to them. I am not sure I'm expert enough about what the requirements are for our draft. Is pointing to a live URL, a wiki page enough for this, or what exactly do we need? Do you have any documentation that describes what I need to qualify the citation that I do in my document? So our deal is basically what is the best references you can point to, right? Which in a perfect world would be immutable and great and things like that. But recognize what you're talking about here is you're kind of accommodating something that's not all that nailed down. Yes. But if doing that is the right thing to do, then it seems like to me that we should be able to find a way to do that. I think that I think the criteria for references and things like that for standards track would be a lot higher. Yeah. So we could have conversations about
informational or even experimental. But the high order bid on that was to make us figure that out.
Okay.
So you don't have to.
All right. Yes, I'll appreciate any help, and we'll talk more offline about exactly how I should start that conversation with the IMA community.
Dave, any follow-up?
Well, okay. Chuck basically asked for our view about his sanity. Oh, I think there's definitely insanity here, but it's not Chuck's. There you go.
That's
I'm not licensed to practice medicine anywhere.
That's fair. Just because there is a Linux community working on IMA doesn't mean that the entire Linux community has acquiesced and bought off on this concept. But this is what we have.
Non-Linux Unixes and
Right. So if
Tom mentioned, other operating systems. So yes.
Yeah, I mean, I agree
No
with
place to standardize.
Spencer that it is important to work that out. And if this data is stored on NFS servers for years to come, we want to make sure it's useful for years to come. So,
So the IMA metadata is HMAC hashes.
Well,
that's a
that
standard.
might be the right choice. I don't know.
That's what they do, and that's what they expect to store there. And that already has an RFC that describes it. So that's easy. The IMA part for hashing the contents of a file is very straightforward. It's these other little details about dealing with attributes.
Let me ask a follow-up question.
Sure.
Are you saying that I thought the client was the one that computed the HMAC and sent it to the server, and the server simply returned that value later? So the client
That's
is
one way of
computing
doing
it,
it.
not the server and not the protocol. It's not
The
actually,
protocol is not computing it.
right? It could be any algorithm, any hash algorithm. It's just that it happens to be HMAC as the client computes it.
Someone computes it. We'll say someone computes it. The client.
But does
could.
the protocol require it
The
to be
no.
computed in a specific way? That's my question.
No, but the protocol, we might want to put in the protocol a way of saying this is an HMAC hash versus some other kind of hash.
Oh, a tag that says this is
Yes.
the type of hash. Okay,
Right. But no, the protocol doesn't get its hands on these things.
we have another question.
It's just used as a transport. Go ahead.
And then at Concordia University, I apologize for my ignorance coming in this late. You said a cryptographically signed HMAC hash. Does this presuppose a public key infrastructure? Because otherwise, if
Yes.
everything is within the file system, what are you really proving? Your attacker can modify it.
I kind of brushed over this in an earlier slide. There. So the second bullet. On clients, the keys are stored in a trusted computing module, and they're distributed via some hand-wavy outer space mechanism. So, for example, in a mobile device, the keys would be installed by the manufacturer, for example. On NFS clients, there would be some other mechanism, but there'd be some sort of trusted computing module available on clients to manage and secure the key material. Does that help? Okay. And then just before we move on, to go back to Tom's point about where these things are actually computed. So they can be computed on the server and stored on the server. For example, a cloud provider might take a Golden Master DVD from Red Hat, for example, and put that installation media on the server. And as part of that installation process, the HMACs are computed there and then exported to clients. That's another use case. I think in the cloud tenant use case, the clients are not actually computing these HMACs. They're only consumers of them. Okay.
I'm very slowly navigating this very annoying laptop. To get to your next presentation.
So About a year ago, I think we'd started talking about RPC over RDMA version 2, and exactly what, or maybe it's been longer than that. And we had a couple of interesting ideas that we wanted to go with there. I think what I'm going to do with this next presentation is solicit opinions about exactly how we're going to fix the problem of credit management. And I hope to demonstrate that it's a problem that we do need to solve in version 2. And we need to figure out exactly if there is a problem, if there are more than one problem, we need more than one issue, we need to figure out which issues we need to address and which ones we can leave. Battery cover keeps falling off this. Okay.
I'll be happy to navigate if it stops working. Just say the word.
Okay, so I just talked about this slide. What shortcomings do we need to address in V1? I think that's the question I want you to hold in your heads as I'm giving this talk. So I'm just going to briefly talk about exactly what credits are and how it works in V1 today. The RPC transport on RDMA has a flow control mechanism in it so that the server is not overrun. This mechanism is credit-based. It's not pause-based or loss-based or rate-based. It uses credits, and that has a particular meaning. The receivers have the authority to grant credits to the senders. Basically, that's a capability to receive one piece of like it could be a message or a number of bytes. Anyway, a credit has a particular meaning depending on the protocol. But the receiver grants a credit to the sender, and the sender waits until a credit has been granted before it transmits. And then in that way, the receiver is able to put back pressure on the sender and prevent it from overrunning it. So in RPC over RDMA v1, a credit is equal to a transaction, an RPC transaction, a call and reply. So it's not based on the number of bytes. Some transport protocols do it that way, but we don't. It's one RPC transaction. In the RPC reply, the responder grants a credit. So that's how the credit grant gets from the receiving end to the sending end. Responder is the receiver. And then as part of this protocol, exactly one credit is available as soon as a connection is established, and then that's of course before the first reply has been sent. So one credit is available before the first reply has been sent. So there are some other features of our credit architecture. I think the two that are, non-windowing is probably the most important one. What that basically means is our RPC over RDMA version 1 responders tell the requesters exactly how many total RPC calls can be done. They don't tell how many. I'm not saying this right. It's kind of complicated. Tom, can you help me out?
Well, I got it. Let's see if I can help.
Yeah.
Instead of issuing the delta as a stream of deltas,
Right.
it issues the absolute value
Which
of the credits,
generally doesn't change.
which may or may not be changing, and
Right.
which also is possibly shifted in time, right? There's no window as you described. You're not
Right.
granting a credit per request retired, for instance, here. You're just
Right.
saying, here's the new number.
So to put it in terms of real numbers, the Lynx NFS server, for example, sets up 32 receive buffers, and so the number of credits it gives to clients is 32 all the time. It says I can take 32, and that doesn't matter how many are pending. Like all 32 buffers might be consumed at one moment, but the credit grant is still 32, so it's not windowing. And then adaptive means that the responder's credit grant can change during the lifetime of connection. In other words, if the server gets busy, it can reduce the credit grant to like, say, 16 to create some more back pressure on clients. Non-windowing is important in a subsequent slide. So stick a pin in that one. So this mechanism has a number of shortcomings. It's done all right so far for handling most NFSV3 and V4 workloads, but there's some lack of generality and some things that we just can't do with this. So let me walk through some of those problems. Today, if there's no RPC transaction involved in a send or receive, then we can't support that because a credit is connected to an RPC transaction. So for example, if I want to do a control plane message, it's not going to have an RPC XID associated with it. I can't really support that with this mechanism because it's got to have an RPC message. It's got to be sending an RPC message. Probably the biggest one is it doesn't support unpaired messages. The number one most common type of unpaired message is retransmission. So today, for example, when the Linux client has to retransmit, basically what it does is it drops the connection because it has to reset the credit grant, and dropping the connection is the only way to do that today.
Well, to be fair, it was expected it's a reliable connection. So requests should never be lost by the transport. They should only be lost by the upper layer. But that would be illegal as well.
Still, the upper layer loses things on occasion, or there are occasions where the upper layer is required to drop.
If you want to support retransmission, the credits are awkward. Yeah.
Yes. Now we don't have any use cases in NFS, but a unicast, a call without a reply is not supported. The original RPC over RDMA v1 had an RDMA done procedure. That was a one-way transmission, and that's not supported. There's no RPC message. Well, there is an RPC. It's part of an RPC transaction, but it's a one-way. And then, unsolicited sends from responder to requester are not supported. I don't have a good use case for that, but.
Well, callbacks, right?
Right. Yes. Right. So
one thing that's not on your list that's been discussed is message continuation, where you have you have send and reply, but it's not
right here.
one-to-one.
It's on 8, slide 8, right here. Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yes, I agree. I haven't gotten to that yet. So, for example, if we want to use multiple RDMA sends to send a single RPC call, we can't do that today because it's one call and one reply, one message, one call message, one reply message today. Tom mentioned bi-directional RPC. One of the problems that we had with that is that we had to reuse the credit field, but as soon as you're doing a call in both directions, the use of the credit field is ambiguous. We're really not sure whether, well, this is hard to explain. Trust me, this is a problem. It's okay until one side wants to send an error, an RDMA error. Yeah, that's the problem. And then I mentioned this before, if one side loses track of the credit grant, there's no way to synchronize except by dropping the connection. And there really isn't any other, there isn't a way for one side to go, oh, gee whiz, I lost, can you send me the grant again? Or can you update my grant? Or, it's just like, you just have to drop the connection and start from one.
That seems a pretty thin rationale for being a protocol issue. It's a client issue if it forgets, right? Or a peer issue. But
well, again, the things that I just went through, all those things can cause a loss of synchronization. But yeah, I agree. There are implementation bugs where that would result in this most frequently, and all right. Generally it's not a problem with the protocol is well designed. And then here's another stretch. We don't have any way of guaranteed quality of service in the sense that, one side or the other side may want to say, I don't ever want to go down to 1. Don't ever take me all the way down to 1. I want to have at least 4 or at least 8. So
In my experience, credits are a terrible way to implement quality of service.
that's legitimate, but we can't do that even if we want to.
Okay.
So, and then finally, I want to tie this into RDMA, RPC over RDMA version 2. What we want to do, one of the extensions that we wanted to allow, not necessarily defined in the base protocol, but allow as an extension to the protocol, is the ability, as Dave mentioned, to send an RPC that consists of multiple RDMA sends, multiple messages. And without, with the current credit accounting that we have in RDMA, RPC RDMA version 1, we cannot do that. So this is the basic reason why I believe we have to fix this problem in V2. We can't just sort of hand wave and say, oh, it's going to be fixed in an extension. I think that the base V2 protocol has to address this. So here's some of the things that we'd kind of like to be able to support in V2 eventually, not in the base protocol, but eventually as an extension to it. So we'd like to get rid of sending moderate size RPCs using an RDMA read. Those are kind of expensive. There's an extra round trip there. We would like to do that using RDMA send. And one way to do that is by using multiple sends for one RPC. One of the things I've always wanted to be able to do is allow a client to cancel an ongoing RPC transaction. And the reason you want to do that is because the client is exposing memory. And if someone hits Control-C and the application dies, that memory registration goes away, and the server is still running the RPC transaction, and it will try to write into that memory and will fail, and that will cause the connection to die. And to avoid that, we basically want the client to have a mechanism in the protocol to say, oh, by the way, this memory is no longer available, so you can either finish running this transaction or just stop it now, but don't try to write back into this memory. And I know that Tom has some disagreement about whether that is effective or not, but it's something that we might want to think about.
Cancellation can be effective. I'm open to your proposal.
Okay. And then I'd written a draft that's actually probably expired today, but it expired just today, that I'm planning to refresh. But I want to provide a mechanism for being able for the server to return an arbitrarily large RPC reply. Basically today, the clients have to estimate how large the reply message can be, and sometimes they get it wrong because the upper layer protocol is, there are certain operations in the NFS protocol, for example, it's difficult, like for example, get ACL.
ACLs, named attributes, you name it.
Right. There's no way for the client to put an upper bound on the size of
How is that different from the RPC request continuation that you mentioned in the earlier bullet? True enough. Thank you, Dave. You know in advance, for those who didn't hear on the thing, when sending the request, you know how big it is. When receiving the reply, you may not know how big it's going to be.
Also in V2, I think we would like to put reverse direction operation right into the base protocol. And there have been error reporting I mentioned right here was one of the bugaboos with it, but also the fact that in the reverse direction, the receiver has to sniff the RPC message to see which direction it's going in, which is a layering violation that's ugly, but we kind of held our noses, our collective noses, and went with it for version 1. For version 2, I don't think we have to do that. So on this slide, I'm hoping to get the conversation going by mentioning some possible fixes we might consider. This is certainly not an exhaustive list of possible fixes, but one thing we're definitely going to have to do is, instead of gating RDMA sends on RPC transactions, we're going to have to do it some other way to allow multiple sends per RPC transaction. As I said, the non-windowing aspect of version 1 credit management was important. One thing I think we might want to do is consider changing to a windowing scheme instead. In other words, the responder would provide a dynamic credit grant saying, I have this many buffers free right now, and it would be the total number minus the number of pending RPCs, and rather than always the total number. That wouldn't require an XDR change, but I think that's something we should consider. One thing I've seen other protocols do is they have a credit field in their transport header for each direction on the connection. So one credit field for client to server RPC transactions and one credit field for server to client, in other words, reverse direction. Or we could take our 32-bit credit grant field and split it into two 16-bit fields, depending on how creative we want to get with it.
Are these in the draft, these approaches?
They're not written down in a draft yet.
Not yet, okay.
At least I don't think they are. Are they?
So you want feedback on these today, or?
Feedback, yes, today if you can, but that's not necessary.
Okay. All right, keep going.
And then the last bullet is the idea is to add a new proc RDMA ACK, but its only job would be just to ACK an unpaired send, but it could also be used to convey the current grant. So you could use it to recover from a situation where one side had lost sync or had sent a retransmission. Okay, questions, suggestions? You are permitted to question my sanity, as always.
Well, I guess I have a couple. They're just questions. Let me ask a fundamental one. RPC RDMA was always tied to having RPC, and in particular NFS, although others were envisioned, as the upper layer. Do you envision this as becoming a layer of its own without the support of an upper layer? Useful to other protocols, for instance?
Well, I mean, for example, you could apply to an existing legacy protocol like NLM. Or,
well, yeah, but those are all RPC protocols, right?
Yeah. This is an RPC transport protocol, so it'd be
okay.
used,
So you're going to stick to that plan that it's an
Yes.
RPC transport.
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
It has results and arguments and results. It has
Yes.
It has methods and. but
Yes, the
they may
purpose
be
of this
slightly
transport
differently.
is to move RPCs.
Okay. You do want the single-ended behavior, a request without a response or a broadcast, that kind of thing.
Yes,
And you
because
do-
RPC allows that.
And
Yes.
you do want to add cancellation. Those are two things of note that are not in RPC today. Well, broadcasts are, I guess, in RPC.
Yes.
All right. Well, the RDMA ACK would require some sort of, it would require the XID to be a rather important part of the RPC RDMA protocol, which today it's not. Today it's just a copy of an
Just a copy.
XID that's at the upper layer. But your RDMA ACK would allow it to handle, a request without a response, for instance. So the XID would be the only identifier. I think that would up the pressure on the XID, which is a really weak field right now.
So the ACK would have to be part of an RPC transaction.
Well,
We couldn't use it, for example,
you
to.
may need a better name for the operation, than the XID today.
Well, one of the things we've been talking about is having control plane operations as well, and which wouldn't have an XID,
No XID at all. Yeah.
right? So ACK, obviously, if it
Right.
requires an XID, it wouldn't work for control plane operations.
Right. Well, you may want to think about defining some sort of RPC RDMA, request space, right? A sequence number or some sort of identifier in the RPC RDMA stream that names each message or that names each set of messages if you're going to fragment them and, reassemble them on receipt.
In other words, making credit accounting also be have a sequence ID. In other words,
Well,
you
yeah, I
pass
think
back a
I
credit
think
grant
you're
and
going
a
to need a
sequence
sequence
ID.
ID.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're going to violate the ordering principle in the sense that you're going to intermingle requests and replies on a channel, for instance. Or you're going to be able to insert things like a cancel that aren't logically part of the data stream or other control messages. And so I think you're going to define a new sequence space at the RPC RDMA layer that is not currently there. Many protocols will simply use an ordering principle for this. They say you're going to start sending fragments, and then every message that follows until you get a done bit is a member of this fragment sequence. But you might be able to insert something in that sequence now, and that breaks the ordering that was
Well,
previously.
what if you said, you can't send one of these control plane messages until you've completed the send of an upper layer message?
Right, you could make that requirement, but you're going to explicitly add that processing requirement to RPC RDMA that isn't there today. So I think it's an opportunity to think through how you're going to name operations in RPC RDMA space. Right now, they simply inherit the name of the XID of the RPC operation that they're carrying. And that's why they look the way they are. That's why it's so darn simple, right? The upper layer is doing all the work.
Right. Yeah, I wondered if we needed a second XID space for control plane messages or something like that. But yeah, sequence ID would be the same.
The second XID space would get ugly fast, in my opinion. But
yes, it would.
Might work.
No, I'm just brainstorming. So let me ask a higher level question. How should we proceed with this conversation? Should we add some of these ideas to the V2 draft? Should I write a separate draft? Should Dave and I write a draft? How do I take this forward? Do we need more design conversation? I know Spencer Dawkins suggested a design phone call outside of the meeting schedule. I mean, that works for me.
I guess. The answer to any such question is, of course, send a draft. But, it's how you get to authoring that first version of the draft. If you don't think you have enough information, discussion works great, I think.
Okay.
I'd be willing to join in. I have some pointed opinions here, but it's up to you.
Okay.
One issue now is that -0 of version 2 is just expired. And so you have the choice of waiting possibly a long time to have a more complete draft, or just sort of refreshing this and having a different conversation.
Well, I think having that draft be present on the data tracker is pretty important. So I'm just going to refresh that for now.
I would encourage you not to worry one bit about the status of the draft in terms of being expired or active. The draft is out there. The IETF website will continue to publish it, whether it's expired or not. And if you don't have anything new to say, there's no reason to refresh it.
It's hard to find. That
Okay.
would be, so the people in this room and on the phone know from what you say, but other people who are watching this process from a somewhat more distant perspective might see the missing draft and go, oh, they're not working on that anymore.
Well, in that case, I'd encourage you to add some useful new content and refresh it if you feel that way. You know?
Okay.
I mean, for instance, if you're going to discuss crediting in a separate draft, I would slice it out of the other draft and make a reference.
Well, my personal feeling is that we need to address all this in V2. One of the questions I came into this talk with was, is this something we think is something we need to fix in V2? Do we agree that this is something V2 needs to address? I think I'm seeing nodding. So whatever happens, I think I would like to address it in that draft. So, okay. Now we have to move on, so
Yeah, time
relinquish.
check. We are at our 1 hour point.
relinquish the wand of unseemly.
We have an hour and 1/2 left until 12 noon for Tom Haynes and Dave Novak's items.
Okay.
Watch out for the battery door.
Yeah. Am I in the box?
Stand in the orange box, speak into the microphone.
Okay. I had a problem at the airport because I was too tall. The automated face tracker.
Oh, yeah.
I kept on going down like this and I got upset. So delegation of state IDs. What I thought I'd do with these slides is I thought I would go over the problem and not go over the document. So I came up with a standard format. I was bored on the plane. The first problem I'm going to talk about is offline files. And the use case that we actually have is we were in testing and development, and we we also push our files to the cloud. And our QA was coming to a screaming because every time they tried to look at a file through the Mac file browser, it downloaded the file from the cloud, and they said, I don't want to do this. What's causing this? And the thing that was causing this is the Mac file browser looks at, like, I think the first 64K of the file and says, tries to give a preview of the file in the browser when you hover over it. And we looked at the sequence of ops, and we saw an open. And we said, why are we sending the open? Well, the open's being sent because the file browser wants to open it. And that led to a read request of the DS, the data store, and we just don't want that. So we looked at what SMB was doing, and it was looking at the offline bit and saying, if the file is offline, don't download it and don't open it for this file browser. And we're looking at the cost. The cost is dollars, even in testing, in QA testing. We have to get a copy from the remote store, and most likely we're just going to either throw that copy away or return it back to the object store, which is more cost. I go fast, by the way. Slow me down if you need to ask questions. Yeah. Well, I'm good. I'm about through a third of my slides, and I'm going to take 5 minutes, so.
It's all right.
Yeah. The solution is we want to introduce a new attribute called the offline bit, and that's going to simply, when the client does a get attr, the initial sequence, it's going to ask to say, do you have the offline bit? If it does have the offline bit, we send it back. The client will not open the file. And so, here's where I deviated from the slides. I was thinking in the introduction, all of the work I'm showing is driven by the fact that we have someone in QA or we have some director who'll come to us and say, why do you keep on sending get attrs? Right? And so we're trying to reduce get attrs. We're trying to reduce, these performance. We're trying to increase performance by reducing get attrs. And here's a case where a get attr is actually good. It tells you, hey, don't bother reading the file.
Well, you can still open the file if you want to, right?
Yes, but the point is to make that be an explicit calculation.
A hint to say, this is going to be expensive. Do you
Yes.
really want to do it?
Yes.
Got it.
I'm actually going to use the file contents.
Yes, exactly. And then, another one we did was we used to have an open and a layout get be in the same compound, and we're of occasions where we'll break that because we want the layout get is expensive. We only want the client to do that when they explicitly have to read the file. Proxying of times. So another one we saw was our CEO has a simple use case. He's got 40,000 files from presentations from his past companies to now. He untars them across the network, and he uses that as a quick performance goal. All right, it's not very scientific. He has a new presentation, things change, but it's a very simple write workload, and he uses it to break me all the time. So we have another, besides the simple metadata server, we actually have another gateway for V3 and for SMB, and it allows our storage device, the metadata server, it allows it to only speak NFSV4.2. And when we want to allow access to legacy clients, we have a gateway, a data portal that speaks NFSV3 and it speaks SMB. And so as the client connects, it's translated to, we have a file cache that keeps the V4 file open and allows the client to connect through. And one of the things we found what was happening is that the data portal would essentially expand the get attr request from the client and spam the storage device And we were wondering why this was occurring. And we were looking at the get adders, and we were thinking, well, wait, why are we sending get adders? We're sending NFSV3 writes. They have WCC. That should be supplying information to the proxy cache. And I spoke to the Linux client implementer. He said, well, we can't trust that. I said, why can't you trust that? And he goes, well, because the DS is not authoritative on the data portal is not, the storage device is not the one that's authoritative on the times. And so, and we looked at the test, the internal test I just described, and it was 40K files, and we saw 72K get adders. Right, and we want to reduce those. And so I said, well, what do we have to do to make the DS authoritative on the weak cache consistency? And the reply was, we had to delegate not only the size, but the proxying of the times. Okay, so we put together a 4.2 implementation that allowed the metadata server to tell the proxy it is now authoritative on the A time and the M time, and could calculate the C time.
Doesn't that require a clustered relationship between all the DSs?
No, well, you would think it does. We don't have such a clustered relationship.
Huh.
All right, Tom. So the things we had to put in place is we had to say that they have to be in time sync. Okay. Well, that's not a hard one to make, because when you have Kerberos, you have to make the same claim.
Plus or minus 5 minutes, but okay, yeah.
Right. Well, we were actually looking. We were using everything works on VMware.
Yeah,
and
I'm
we were
sure they're
noticing,
very well synchronized.
No, they're not,
Oh,
actually.
okay.
We were noticing a 2-second
Really?
time drop when we had a very heavily
Yeah, but even if you
loaded
don't have
cluster.
even if you have a time sync, you might be writing to stripe A like crazy, and stripe B is sitting there idle, so that the
Yes.
DSs have a very different view of the world.
Yes, they do. And you know, when I was doing the slides yesterday, that came to me with, I don't have it in the slide deck. I have it in a reply I sent to Mike yesterday in the email. So what we have to do is the cluster has to the metadata server has to maintain a view of what each data store has.
But the metadata server doesn't know the writes are happening at all.
Agreed.
Okay.
The metadata server knows the writes are happening when the client
Gets
sends a
layout,
get adder
yeah.
and says, can you give me the size? Can you give me the times?
Oh.
At that point, the metadata server does a get adder to the data
you
stores.
Clever person, you. Okay. Why
Yeah.
are you asking me the attributes? Oh, you must have been doing it right.
Yes.
Hmm.
And if he doesn't ask, we don't care.
Okay.
So when we do such a proxying, then the metadata server doesn't bother asking the client. Well, the metadata server assumes the client that owns it is not going to ask, because it knows the information. And it's finally so we have to allow a callback so that the metadata server can get the information for another client. When the client that owns the delegation is done with the delegation, it has to do a set adder to set that information back. And by the way, it has to have a new attribute to do that, so that it can say, this is the field I'm authoritative for, and I'm giving you the answer, versus you're trying to do an explicit setting of those attribute fields, as you might do with a tar. And on the test workload, we saw 3 get adders instead of 72,000. As you can imagine, that was a significant savings. Oh, wait, I was just there. What did I miss? Did I skip anything? I'm sorry, I got lost. I think we're good. So the final one we were looking at is, we noticed that when you have an open file is defined this is one I always have to explain to my QA people and to marketing. An open file that someone considers open actually means you either have an open or a delegation state ID. So it's very confusing when you see the open and then you see a close and you tell them, no, the file's still open, but they said, oh, I saw it close. And you have to hammer in the fact it's not that the file that it's not the open and close that mean the file is open. It's the presence of the state IDs. And then where you see this a lot, where you're able to explain it, is when you have the lazy return model for layouts. When the ODS count, where the ODS is the open delegation state ID count, goes to 0, the layout is implicitly returned by the client. Well, if you return both of the delegation states, you have to maintain an extra state, which can be costly when you have a million files open. The client also has to send a close to get rid of the open state ID, which also means you're going to see another get adder, and get adders are evil. Small cost, but they add up. So the solution is that when the client asks for an open, it can set a flag saying, I either want the open or the deleg, but not both. The MDS will try to return only one. It might return both, because it might be an old MDS. And the other complication is that the MDS has to determine the correct state ID in the compound that says sequence put FH open get adder layout get. The layout get is assigned to what the current state ID, and a typical implementation would only be considering the open state ID. So it has to be able to track that. Those were the 3 items we've got in the draft. Version 0 is published. I have 3 reviews. I'm going in reverse order, so I've gotten Mike's review done. I'm in the middle of Chuck's, then I have Dave's. And I want the next draft version to be an official working group item. Questions? Comments?
You have 3 interesting features here, but the question I want you to consider is, how many drafts are they? Do they really belong in one?
You know, that my reply is they're pretty much 90% of the document is boilerplate. And I struggle with, so one of Chuck's comments was, your abstract should be the last line. And that's even too terse for me, and I'm very terse. So I want to keep them as one because they all are related in that they deal with open and delegation state IDs.
Procedurally, I think it's okay for you to choose however many drafts you feel is appropriate. If they're related in your mind, that's okay.
Yeah, they are
the
related.
working group may still choose to reject or pick apart,
Yes.
these things, but that's part of the course of the working group
Yes.
work. So either is acceptable, I think. That's a personal opinion.
Figure out how to name it.
Yeah. I'm looking at Chuck's name, and I'll go with.
Yeah, I think it would be good to have it's Del STID right now, which it makes it seem like it's only about
Right.
a certain topic. But if there's more hiding under there, maybe it's a small set of extensions for attributes and state IDs, or I don't know what.
Open delegation extensions.
The off open deleg proxy time.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. In that case, I'm done. And I did not drop the battery case, Chuck. I held on to it with dear life.
Okay. Thank you. I've sent the drafts to our chairs and area director in hopes that they have the password to upload it. But I unfortunately don't have it, so I'm going to have to do this by the old-fashioned way. That requires finding an open USB port. I guess I can unplug this mouse. Wow.
Probably take them over to the
Yeah, there's the blue sheet at the front corner desk.
Well, if you can make up names and you can get a bigger turnout. Has anyone here been known by any other name?
Go ahead, Spencer.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if we're talking about the email that was sent with the 2 files to the mailing list, I may be able to upload those.
That would be great. I'm having a heck of a time literally putting my USB stick into the USB port of this darned laptop. It won't go.
I'll be back.
Dave, what? This thing literally won't go in. It starts and then it kind of like,
Okay.
let me just jam the sucker as hard as I can.
That's a standard that wasn't done right.
Removable device detected.
Okay.
All right, Dave, which one do you want first?
I guess we'll talk in MSNS. That one, yeah.
There you are.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to be talking about some stuff that's farther along than the other stuff. So we're having to wrap up a few things, and this is what I'm going to talk about. So talking about there are 3 drafts involved that involve the multi-server namespace features of NFSV4.0 1. Sort of 2. Okay. This work?
In theory,
Well,
I did unplug the mouse because I have but this little stick over here is the receiver for the.
do I put this way? Oh, that's the wrong button.
Something's happening.
Yeah, I know. This is working. I should,
All right,
should go
Dave,
to the next slide.
Dave, I'll drive.
Okay, sure. Okay, so as I said, we all right. All right.
Did you click?
No, I didn't. I swear I didn't. All right, so we had this multi-service name. We've been plagued with problems. I did these chapters in all these RFCs, and somehow I screwed up all of them. Sorry about that. Anyway, work has been going on to address these. First of all was RFC 7931, which became a proposed standard in 2016. And the 3 that I'm talking about now that we're working on finishing up, which is migration issues, the update for NVs for minor version 0, and the update for minor version 1. And I think all those are coming along pretty well. So let's go on to the next slide. Okay. Oops.
Okay, apparently if I press the down arrow
Okay.
and then click, I get
Right, so
2
the areas that we
events.
have to provide for is trunking detection, all right, which that is, if you have 2 IP address, you want to make sure, you want to determine whether they're connected to the same server. And that has so far, due to RFC 7931 and RFC 5061, been dealt with. Then we have, in addition to trunking detection, we need trunking discovery. That is, given that you're connected to you have one connection to a server, how do you find the other ones? You have trunking detection says, well, if you had one, you'd be able to see if it was a real one, but trunking discovery is something else. And we need that for both NFS v4.0 and for v4.1. We also need transparent state migration, because when you have a file system migrated from one server to another, you have to have the ability to easily have the client continue to access the files that he was accessing them without the possibility of them losing state or being opened by someone else. So that has been defined for v4.0, but is needed for v4.1. And also, although we've only now become aware of it, we have to deal with the possibility of multiple connection types.
Dave, just to interrupt for a moment, has the working group decided that it's appropriate to go back and update 4.0 and 4.1 at this time? Or is that a proposal to do so?
I guess. I don't know whether we're doing this. We made these working group documents, so I guess it has decided.
Okay. Well, all right.
Nobody
I
has said
apologize.
I moved that, blah, 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 and nobody seconded it, but. I
Okay,
think
well,
the
we
process
can
is-
discuss later, but it strikes me odd that we would go back in time and update 4.0. I'm not sure there would be a whole lot of adoption of it. But we should have that discussion in the working group, perhaps.
Sure. Well, we skipped 7931, we did had that same issue, and I think we had to follow through. All right. Anyway, all right, we'll go on to the next slide and we'll discuss. All right. First, we'll discuss, these are the various documents and standards that we had. So we said in RFC with 3530, we start out with no support for trunking. Trunking, according to RFC 3530, is a problem. It's not a feature, and it is a problem. It's warns sort of darkly about what might happen if you have multiple connections. It goes to some effort to prevent that from being determined. Anyway, RFC 5661 did provide trunking detection, but for some reason we didn't think about the problem of trunking discovery. And in RFC 7530, that was an opportunity we had to address trunking, but we didn't do it then. And we finally did it in RFC 7931. But again, just as with RFC 5661, we did not address trunking discovery. However, we've decided, I've decided, Chuck's decided, I hope the working group has decided to provide trunking discovery for v4.0 and v4.1, and it's easy since it's the same for both protocols, and there's no XDR change. Now, transparent state migration has had different thing. We RFC 7530 had attempted to have transparent state migration, but it was messed up. And then RFC 7931 fixed it. And then we, for some reason, did not do this right in RFC 5061. And so now we need to provide transparent state migration in v4.1. Now, for multiple connection types, v4.0 did not mention the existence of multiple connection types, but it was intended that v4.0 support multiple connection types. In particular, RPC, RDMA, it was supposed for v3, v4.0, v4.1, and so it needs to see something about that in the multi-server namespace case, and also before the corresponding update for minor version 1 will also have to clarify and include that. All right, so that's the end of that slide. All right, now draft IETF NFSV4 migration issues has been going on for a very long time. It's been like 3 years? Yeah, at least. All right, but it's sort of making progress, and I think it's getting fairly near. It addresses a lot of stuff. It addresses migration, trunking detection and discovery, and multiple connection types. And it deals with, the decision was to do, like, in this case, we didn't want to have separate documents for v4.0 and v4.1 because the problems are so similar and the solutions are mostly similar. So we just wound up with a document. It started out as describing v4.0, but then we transitioned it to describing both, and we're completing on that basis. Next slide. Okay, there's material in v14. I thought that has had a lot of review. It discussed trunking discovery, transparent state migration, Now, the discussion of transparent migration sort of describes what has been done in 7931, and the one for v4.1 describes what will be done. So they're different. It's in pretty good shape. We have no pending issues. And I recently published a -15, which includes the handling of multiple connection types. And also another thing which people should look at is the discussion of possible extensions to v4.2. I think originally there was some discussion. I think Chuck originally started it about some extensions to have information about the capacities of various of your connections. I think that was modeled on something in SMB. Anyway, the original target date, multi-channel, yep. The original target date has gone by. It was really supposed to be done by June, but anyway, I think I sent the working group a copy of my mail to the Spencers, and I'm thinking that we should get it done by August.
Is .15 the current, or is that the next upcoming version?
-15 is current.
Current, got it.
But it hasn't been out all that long, so
Yeah,
I
just
think
recently.
most of the review it had solid review of what's in 14 and -15.
So your
may not-
expectation is that the working group will review -15 and determine whether it's ready for. working group
Well,
install.
that was until this discussion that Rich Macklin started, and we'll go see the next slide.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
Jumping ahead. So
Yes,
sorry.
jumping ahead, yes.
Please continue.
Okay, sure. Next slide then. Right. So we do want to get to WGLC soon. Okay. For the material in 14, the review should already have occurred. And if it hasn't, let's see that it gets done. Changes in 15 have been out for a month, and they still might need some further review. Now, I expect that to be 16. Now, 16 will have material about the RC1FS issue, which is discussed in the next slide. That was brought up by Rick Macklin. And don't know exactly what to do about it, but I've been working on addressing it. I have a version of 16 that I could review, but basically I got a mail from Rick said, well, gee, if I knew that that VMware addressed this in the latest thing, maybe I wouldn't have brought this up. I still think it does have to be brought up, but I think the working group has to discuss that. But there will be a 16 out pretty soon. And so I will want comments on 15 by within about 3 weeks from now. And then based on the comments, I'll produce a 16. I assume it will have the stuff about 1FS, but if people decide that it doesn't need it, I can take that out. And I can also add any other comments that I receive about 15 in the meantime. That will be, I'm assuming that 16 will be the basis for WGLC. All right. So Rick Macklin described this by actually running and looking at what VMware was doing. VMware does reclaim complete with RC1FS set to true, although false is what it's supposed to be. And Rick points out that the treatment is not as explicit as it should be about what the purpose of reclaim complete with 1FS set to true is. And so one thing that we might do is clarify that. And many servers work with current VMware client behavior, and I'd like to, if we do fix the spec, also allow interoperability with the existing clients. So anyway, I've been dancing around that, and I think that's not an issue for -16 of migration issues, because my -16 of migration issues says only that we need to address this. Later, I'll talk about MV1, which I'm still working on. Anyway, I think migration issues will probably need, I say here will need, but actually the working group hasn't decided that. But we have to decide what we want to do in migration issues about that, whether we want to address that issue that's going on. All right, now, unlike the other specs, the goal for this, the milestone goal for this is get to working group last call rather than final document, because we don't know for sure whether they're going to produce the final thing. We could produce an information document which we could submit for publication, but it isn't clear it's worth doing that, and the working group needs to decide, and I've I've gone both ways on this. The pros are, this explains the overall reasons for these changes in a way that's RFC 7931 and the individual working standards track documents don't. It also contains some material about possible V4.2 extensions. On the other hand, well, we haven't published such documents in the past. It's a lot of work, and it's not clear who would read it once it is published. Anyway, we have to make a decision about that at some point. And I'm not sure exactly how we'll do that. I'm not sure whether that's the working group to decide or whether the authors and editor will decide, but we have to make a decision about that sometime. And I think we should probably decide about whether we'll go forward with that after WGLC. Yep.
David Black, been involved in a related situation, another working group that I don't want to talk about, but let me see if I can extract some useful advice. I think the crucial question is almost down the bottom of the slide. Does the contents of this draft, so do the contents of this draft have archival value over and above the other RFCs published? Will they help someone who is trying to implement the RFC 7931 and it looks like an RFC to be on trunking, want to read this doc to figure out how to get the implementation right?
I don't think so, but I don't know if I can put myself in the mind of that person. So maybe the working group decision will focus, the discussion will focus on that issue.
I think that's the question to the working group. Will this doc have archival value to implementers in the future? Once the working group has a position on that, then the higher level sausage making can move from there. Spencer is familiar with the situation that I'm obliquely referring to and don't want to discuss, and will understand the sausage making reference.
All right. Okay. Well, I don't want to know about sausage making. No one does.
No, and you really don't want to know about this stuff.
So to summarize, we would, it's not necessarily the working group that would make this decision. It would be a discussion with IETF historians or how do we make the decision?
Let's back off from the decision. I believe that there are at least two decisions here. Decision one is the working group needs to come to rough consensus on archival value or lack thereof in this doc. That is absolutely a working decision that is owned by the people in this room, online and on the mailing list. Is this document useful to publish? Does it have value to future implementers? And I'm just using implementers. It might be broader, but that decision is the working group's decision. Once the working group has a rough consensus decision on that, then the higher level sausage making starts to figure out whether that decision leads to publication as an RFC or not. But let's get the decisions in the right order. Sure. And the working group should focus on the technical question of archival value of this document.
Okay, fine.
Perfect. Yeah. And that'll also bear on whether it's an informational RFC or a standards track and that kind of thing.
There's no chance of it being
based on what I think I understand from this slide, informational is the only plausible status.
Okay.
This does not. I don't see anything up here that suggests standards track. Did I miss something? Apparently not.
All right.
Next.
All right. Thanks.
Right. Now we're back to standards track.
Sure, your schedule program.
Yes, there you go. Well, no.
Oops. Did I open the wrong one?
Well, that's out of order. Way out of order.
Sorry.
How am I doing? I'm okay on time, right?
Yes, it is 11:05. We have 55 minutes remaining.
Okay, right.
Is this the deck you want to start on?
No, I want to go back to the other deck.
Oh, you want
The
to?
second half of the other deck.
second half of the other deck.
Right,
There's
this
another-
one right where we're right there. Yeah, right. Well, let's see. I think we need to go back a couple of slides. Okay, trunking. Let's go back. Okay, trunking update. This is all right. Yes, trunking update.
Here.
This is a standards track document addressing the remaining issues for minor version 0, and it fulfills the needs identified in the informational doc. And so it's parallel to the corresponding MV1 MSNS update, which is the standards track document for minor version 1. Much of the contents of MV1 and MSNS update was addressed by RFC 7931 because for some reason we did, because I think at that point people were more interested in V4, more back in V4.0, and we needed to address the issues with with transparent state migration in V4.0. And somehow we thought, well, gee, V4.1 will be easy. We were wrong. Anyway, it has the needed changes. It adds trunking discovery. It adds trunking detection is already there. Got that in RFC 7931. And -1, which is coming very soon. I just heard from Chuck. That's have further material on multiple connection types. Yes.
Not a question, more preemptive, move to the microphone to fill in any details. But I just want to say, if you think 01, which you've seen a preview of, is ready for us to move on to last call, we can request that now. I'm comfortable with that.
I think it is.
Okay. Then I'll,
Well, you have to submit it first and then request the last call.
well, it just expired, so I'll, when I submit when I submit 01, I will ask Spencer to promote it.
Great.
Okay.
All right, next slide. Which may, we need working group discussion of material in 00, which I think has been discussed, and since I'm the only one Chuck and I are the only one who's seen 01. Other people have to see it and comment on it. I said submission of 01 is expected soon. Now change that to very, very soon, like next 20 minutes or something like that.
Today or tomorrow.
Today or tomorrow. Anyway, and we do have to go through working group last call, and Chuck is going to request that. So therefore, the target date of 11/2018 looks doable. I think probably it'll be earlier than that. So that deal, I think that document we're going on with. Next slide.
I'm not sure I totally understand. It says further work needed and then last call. So, I mean, last call would end the work, right?
Well, wait a minute.
I don't.
Further work group discussion is needed.
Well, the subject line of the slide says
Oh.
further work needed. So I'm just wondering what that work actually is.
Yes.
In
Well,
my
when I
opinion-
wrote this, I wasn't aware that Chuck was quite as far along as he says.
So
he is.
the
And he's-
authors believe that this is ready for working group last call in the 01 version. Is that what I'm taking away?
I think we agree it is.
Well,
Okay. Good.
yes.
Good.
I think it's ready.
Well, I just want to write something down that makes sense.
I was holding
That's
back a
all.
little here, but actually it is ready. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, we might just decide, the group might decide looking at it, no, this is not ready, but I think we're
Okay,
ready for
so yeah,
everyone to
right.
look
There
at
is
it.
no process going forward. Just forget this slide. We're done. It never existed. It didn't happen. Okay, forget it. On to the next slide, and the next document.
Oh, I thought I am on the next item. You
You-
just summarized that with,
Yeah, right. Okay.
okay,
sure.
take it to the
That's-
list. Got it.
Yeah, right. All right, now there's a corresponding document which is not quite as far along. That addresses the V4.1 needs. That has to parallel, rather than just depending on 7931, it has to parallel that work. And actually, there were a lot of things about how you deal with PNFS, a few other things. Anyway, it was that document is moving on, and it's longer. It's about 60 or 70 pages. Anyway, it adds trunking discovery, just as the version 0 does. Trunking detection was already present in 5661. It's transparent state migration, and the O1, which has been out recent, hasn't been out that long, has been further material on multiple connection types. All right, next slide. So we do need some working group discussion of that. I think most of this 00 has been out a while, and we should have had discussion of that. But there have been changes in L1. That's been out about a month, and we haven't seen much discussion of it. Maybe we need to let that sit. And prototype, given that one has a longer target date, which is March 2019. There's time for prototype implementations to be done, and if people do prototypes and find problems, now's the time to report that. Review is going to take place on the working group mailing list. I urge people to continue to look at the documents and tell us about issues. And if people think a conference call would be helpful, we can schedule that. All right. Now, the target for this document is final document submission by March 2019, which implies that for that to make that, probably have to have working group last call by January. 01 is out, ready to be reviewed, and it could be the WGLC candidate, but there might be a need for W02 if we decide that there's some issues with RCA 1FS, and that discussion will follow the discussion. I think I really want to hear about what Rick Macklin thinks about whether we need to include that. But I've done the work, and I could have an O2 out if we decide that needs to be done. And if we need versions beyond O2, then we would have to adjust the date. But I don't think we will have to. I think we will get this out and done by March 2000.
Are we aware of any other servers that have a problem with the RCA1FS implementation or could use additional guidance on how to do it right?
Well,
Rick just had the one server, and it was kind of a down-level version of that server, right?
No, it's the client that's the problem.
Oh, I thought the server was returning a strange value and the client was doing something even stranger in
the server
response.
is ignoring the RCA1FS field.
Ah.
And it looks like the Linux server does that too.
So clarification sounds warranted for more than one server, at least to steer those implementations to an interoperable goal.
Yeah,
Yes.
Good.
That's my understanding based on a quick browse of the mailing list this morning. There was a report of Linux.
Well, I think he wasn't saying that he was ignoring it. He was basically looking at it, saying, "Oh, because there could be no migration here, I can just ignore this," which is slightly different.
Okay.
And I think
Okay.
in the draft 02 that I'm working on, I sort of address it in that light.
Okay.
All right, I think that's it for that slide deck. All right. Given that I think this is at IETF 99, we decided on some milestones. Now a year's gone by, and we have to look at where they are. So that's what the purpose of this talk.
Come on.
Now there are 2 slides of that.
I knew
but
it would do that.
yes, I did. I didn't want to write very small. Anyway, so we've been talking about a lot of those in the previous thing. Migration issues, as I said, it's an information document, probably. And WGLC is the goal, and that's expected by August, I hope. And NVMe for PNFS is not very far along, and there's another slide where I'll go through this table, and then we'll talk about the problem children. All right, now before .0 trunk and discovery, Chuck is doing that. I've co-authored with it. He's the editor, and we see that seems to be on track or better. Now, there turns out the other document, the 4.1 document, we have as part of 2 goals, and we retain them as 2 goals. They're both on track, and they will be addressed by 1 document. And we're hoping probably that will be out by March 2019. That's the end of that slide. And now we go to CM private data, that's also planned to be an informational. I think that's on track, but that's still an ID, and I think we need a working group document probably at least by the end of this year.
So we have an opportunity now that the three of us, Mr. Talpe, Mr. Novak, and myself, are in the same room to understand what Mr. Talpe's objections to us moving forward with that document are.
Well, I didn't say I had objections. I felt it was important that it be documented.
Yes, and then when we wanted to move forward to publish it as an RFC, an informational one, you said you were not comfortable with that.
I did?
No, I don't
did.
think so.
I don't think I did, but let's talk.
Okay,
In my memory was that he was not comfortable with being standards track. And I don't have a problem with
oh,
that.
I don't think anybody wants it to be standards track.
Well, if you don't want it to be a standards track, then
I don't care.
It's your document. Yeah.
It's informational. Yeah.
Okay. Well, put it this way: if the guy on the other end can ignore it,
Yes,
then it's informational, right? He can use it or not use it.
yes, absolutely. It's meant to be completely transparent if the other end doesn't support
It's out
it.
of band of the
Yes.
RPC RDMA protocol,
Yes.
but nonetheless possibly containing useful information.
If you are comfortable with me proceeding with publication as an informational RFC, I will do that.
Well, let's talk about it because I'm not sure what your original concern might have been. I don't think I had one, although I was concerned that the private data was defining a blob of network transmitted data that was not sufficiently clarified with respect to its requirement, the RPC RDMA protocol, right? So if the relationship between the two is properly defined, informational is fine by me.
Okay, so then it comes down to some technical conversations about the mechanisms defined in that document.
Yeah, I am
And we
curious
can-
what they are. I haven't looked at this document in some time, so
Okay.
I should refresh my thinking on it. But while we're here, let's talk.
Okay, yeah,
Okay.
and also,
All right.
we have to, let's make sure that, because that is going to be promoted from being an ID to a working group document, so it's clear that we need to get clear on that.
All in the course of things. Okay.
Okay, sure. Now, there was a lot of interest at one time in the RDMA layout for PNFS. And that's also, we don't know where that is. The target is September 2019, and it doesn't, I'll have some slides about that. That's also a problem child. Now, Chuck's just talked about some stuff for RPCR RDMA version 2, and that has a target date for final submission of December 2019. I think it's on track, but Chuck's brought out some issues. We have some issues that do have to be addressed, and I think we need that to be a working group document. I said by March, but I think it probably will be a working group document earlier than that. So now let's move on to the two things where we don't know where they are.
Yeah, I think March of 2019 is, that's 9 months away, 8 months away. That seems like a long time to bake before the working group starts to think about it.
Well, okay, it's not prohibited to get this earlier than that date.
Right. Okay.
I just want to make sure that I have room in case bad things happen.
All right. Backing up to the previous one, is Christoph currently working on that document?
I don't know.
We are not able to ascertain that.
Yeah. Yeah, he's been doing other things these days. It's fine for it to sit for a little bit if everybody's busy. I'm just curious if it's moving forward.
Dave has some slides and we'll get into that.
Good.
All right. Also, we have the ability to add milestones. And I think we've sort of been working with a 2-year window. So a 2-year window from now is August 2020. Are the documents that potentially have milestones, and some of the people here or listening might have these documents. We need an owner, some sort of reasonable target date that you have some sort of confidence in. I think Spencer's has been clear that he's not going to ask for your signature in blood or anything, but there has to be working group interest. So some things that we've thought about is integrity measurement, Chuck has presented about. other possible descendants of sec label extensions, or descendants or singular or plural of Tom's Dell state ID. Also, another possibility that I thought about is flexible files v2, if you have interested in pursuing that.
Yeah, actually I do. I have a problem with the flex files v2 in the sense that I have one small change I'd like to get in, but I think it's just heavy-handed the way we have to basically have to have a new layout type in order to do a change. I can't think of another way to do a minor version on a layout type.
I think you just need a new number, but I think you don't have to rewrite the document. You can say this document, you can say layout type B is the same as layout type A, except for these differences. If you can do that, I think you can do that. That's
right. Yeah,
but yes, you do need a new number.
I know we need a new number. I just don't want to do a 40-page document for a one-line change. So I can commit to
you don't have to do that, but you do have to do a 10-page document for one line change, and I can change that.
Yeah. So I can commit to a V2 within the year.
Okay.
It is a good point that it's very difficult to update a layout. We have a very heavy-handed way to update a layout, right? So if we're changing the structure of the layout on the wire, it requires us to upgrade to update the layout protocol type. It's pretty heavy-handed.
Right, Tom. But I think the first three layouts were very not going to change, and we're very cast in stone. It's just as we're trying to get a little bit more flexible, to use the pun, we're finding that we want to be able to change them.
Yeah.
All right, let's go on. Now, NVMe for PNFS. So the current status there is the ID is expired, and we have seen no progress beyond what was discussed in IETF 99. The current target date has gone by. Now, in considering progress, well, I think Chuck is the one who's actually talked to Christoph, and Christoph does say he's interested in working this. But I think Chuck tried to get a date out of Christoph, was unable to. Maybe Chuck would tell me, sort of, has any interesting color to add to that, or?
Not really. He just said that he wasn't able to give me a date at this time.
Okay.
But he does intend to move forward with the document.
Okay. So what's needed is, well, I think you, David, you had discussion with Christoph about what was needed in this document at IETF 99. And I think Chuck's memory of this and mine are somewhat different. I think you decided that a fair amount of work was required. And I think Chuck remembered that it was more smaller. And he was sort of wondering why Christoph didn't do it, given that they thought only a small amount of work was needed.
Thought we were waiting for a citation or something like that.
There was some relevance to the iSCSI layout,
Right.
to the block layout,
Yeah.
and some discussion of why it required a new layout, and references to the.
I don't recall that we are creating a new layout here. I thought that what this document was doing was describing how to use the existing block PNFS layout
Yes.
for NVMe devices.
Well, my
And
memory
there
was
isn't
that
much to it.
there was an issue with the reference, and
Yeah.
David seemed to say, well, gee, well, you're never going to get the perfect document. You just might as well just describe this yourself in this document. And so I conclude that was maybe too much work for Christoph.
Not too much work, just something that he has set aside.
Okay. So in any case, we need to implement the changes that were discussed at IETF 99, which means we have to decide what those were and get to a working group document and then have working group review and discussion.
If nobody's,
Neither voice is going along very
if nobody's driving it, the best we can do is just leave it, as a TBD item. I think.
Yeah, I think that's, okay.
So what you're
that's-
saying is that there's no current momentum to drive this, but it's still of interest to some people.
Yes, it is.
It's long expired. There is someone who is going to drive it eventually, but doesn't have time right at the moment. So I think my only question about this is whether it should remain on our milestone list or not.
Ah, okay.
I'm sure it's going to be done at some point. It's just I'm not sure we can depend at this moment on when.
Yeah, but sometimes as the time gets on, I don't know whether that's meaningful. At some point, maybe just not worth it. I don't know when that time mean. But anyway. All right, let's go on to the next slide. So we could remove it from the milestone list, or we could just leave it on the list with the TBD date. I don't know if we want to do that, but question marks, I don't know if we have question marks or TBD in there, but anyway.
I think it's laudable that you want to keep the milestones up to date, but I think it's okay that it just sort of sits there idly for a period of time.
Okay, so maybe that's the third part. Just leave it on the list with the date it has, and everyone, it's obvious to everyone that it's not.
We've
not
gone
known.
years without updating the milestones in the past,
Yes,
so
that's very
anything
true.
would be an improvement.
We could put a little winky by it.
All right, there you go. So, other things we might do is, maybe we need a more limited document. Maybe I'm right about what David suggested, and maybe we want something that's more like an informational document that just sort of gives people some more limited document that is maybe not standards track, that just gives them their instructions of how you might use this. Maybe we won't get as much as what we want, but that's one way to accelerate progress. Or it's possible to accelerate progress is by giving Christoph some help. If there's anyone, is there anyone out there who might provide that help?
I offered a year ago and he turned me down. So I think he doesn't want help. Again, I don't think it's an issue of help. I think he just has to fill in some details that only he can fill in and then move it along to
Okay.
last call.
Well, all right. I guess that's we'll go on. That's there. I don't see we can go any further than that. Okay.
He's not here to defend himself, so yeah.
Well, he's not being attacked. We're just saying,
I know.
tell us something. Maybe.
Okay, well, I think it's a trackable item. I think it's a worthwhile item, should it ever come to completion. So it's trackable. Whether it's active or not is not totally under our control.
Yep.
In the minutes I just captured, seeking momentum, right? Somebody gets out and pushes, that'd be great.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. All right. Now, the RDMA layout is there's no active document. There's been some prototype working. I don't remember who did that.
There was an active document. It's just fallen into the archive. It's
Right.
It's not been updated.
It's expired. Yeah.
Yes.
So who did that? You mentioned to me someone who did prototyping work and found some issues, but I can't remember who that was.
Steve Byen
Steve Byen,
at
okay.
Oracle.
All right. So one of the things is there's raised some issues, and I don't know whether they were ever communicated to Christoph, and he's addressed them. He's aware of them. Anyway, he's still interested in working in this area, and I think there are lots of people who are interested in having this done. And we now have this target date of September 2019, and I think we now need to consider how realistic that is, or even was. And given that Christoph has some work that on the NVMe layout that he's not getting to, there's a question of, how much other time he's going to have to do this. So anyway, I think that we're perplexed on this one as well. So we need to consider how plausible the target date. Whether the target date is now, I can't remember. I think it's like September 2019.
Yeah, the previous.
Now this is a lot of time, but given, I don't know how, I don't know how much. This is a big project.
It's a
and-
question of who's doing the work at this point, whether we have any confidence in the target date, right?
Right.
We have a known issue. Somebody needs to dig down on the issue and express it in a way that the authors can document or correct the protocol or whatever.
Okay. Is Steve? Is Steve still interested in this? Could he provide the comment?
Steve has posted commentary to the list,
Okay.
and
I just-
Christoph responded to it. I don't think that it resulted in any changes to the draft. So at this point, I don't believe Steve is funded to continue work on it. He's certainly interested, though.
Okay.
I mean, I feel the layout, the RDMA layout has good value, very good
too.
value, right? And so if there are issues, it would be very desirable for somebody to, track them down and either express them or actually write a proposal. If it's not Steve, well, we'll just have to figure out who it might be. But the working group is a volunteer organization, so if nobody's around jumping up and down, it's probably not going to happen right away.
Again, I think there's an issue of Christoph is still interested in doing the work. It just has opportunity is not arising for him. And I think that's probably true of Steve as well.
Oh, is this work Christoph was planning to do?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so Steve found these issues and raised some questions.
They
but-
have
okay.
two separate prototype implementations.
Yeah, this is another one that tracks back to Christoph. Okay, I get it.
Mhm.
Fine. Well, so be it.
Okay. So, well, again, maybe we do the same thing with this one. Just leave it on the list.
Is anybody going to Christoph's Alpine Summit in September?
Not, no.
You've seen Christoph's Alpine Summit, literally on the summit of an Alp. They're going to have a conference.
Yes.
Yeah.
Second annual.
Yeah,
They all survived last year, so.
they did. They
They're gonna
hiked
try
up
again.
and hiked back.
Well, so it sounds like
So it
there's
sounds like we do the
a
same
lot of
thing here. We
interest.
just leave it on the list.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd hate to take it
And-
off the list, that's for sure.
We leave it on the list with the day we have, given that even though nobody believes in the state. I don't believe in the state. I don't know
That's
if
fine.
Christoph believes.
We can replace the date with TBD, but
Okay. Now, right, I guess there's one more slide. Well, we raised this with the other conditional authors. Maybe Christoph doesn't want this, but maybe that isn't dispositive. So does the working group does Christoph has veto power of this? Can this be done by someone else? If there is someone else who wants to do it?
I think the usual way of doing that is for someone else to step up and offer their own draft.
Okay.
And
Well-
of course, anyone is free to prototype what's already in the draft that's expired.
It's also the case that, given that this is a working group draft, correct?
no,
Not
it's still
yet.
individual.
Personal draft. Okay, in which case, what Chuck described, what I was going to say is that if you have a working group draft which progress is not being made, it is possible to add to or replace the author team. But if it's still an individual draft, then what would need to happen is somebody write another individual draft, and they can take as much content as they want from the existing one as they like.
Okay.
With suitable acknowledgement, but you don't have to put the author of the draft which you pull on as an author of the new one. You just simply need to acknowledge their work and contributions.
Okay, sure. So the question of
And for anybody
finding
listening to the recording,
finding
this
that
is
person.
for anybody listening to this recording, this is David Black.
All right, there you are. I guess we have to have that discussion because, well, this is important to people. And I hope someone is interested in working on this, but I don't know who that might be. So that's where we are. That's why this is another problem child project. Okay. I think that's it for this discussion.
Slides do not advance when clicked. This must be the last slide.
It is the last slide.
Okay.
Actually, I didn't know how to fix PowerPoint, so it says slide N of M. It doesn't. There must be some way to do that.
There it is. It's hidden like everything else in PowerPoint.
Does somebody Microsoft in charge?
All right, well, it's 11:35. We completed our stated agenda 25 minutes early. We've done a lot of discussion in between. Is there any other discussion of the topics that have just gone by or any new items? From the Meet Echo, has anybody got anything to add? All right. Well, Chuck, Dave, let's talk about the items that we said we would discuss while we're all in the room together, and we can do that. And otherwise, I'll call the meeting to a close. Thank you.
Pretty close. Out the door. It's on the right side.
I don't know if I'm ever going to get my USB stick out of this laptop. I have no idea why it's so tight. I'm serious. It's impossible to get out.
Well, it's possible to get out. It's possible to get out without destroying the line.
Good question. Or the stick. All right. So I don't know if we can terminate the Meet Echo or not. There's no actual control for it. I think it'll just sort of continue.